Addressing poverty. The president joins a summit of Catholic and evangelical leaders inspired by Pope Francis. Strike two. A second major earthquake hits Nepal, reinstilling fears that had been subsiding. Mary's Month. An expert on the Mother of Jesus explains why May is dedicated to Our Lady. And Paradise Lost. Hawaiians are upset over an abortion study being conducted on the islands. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 12th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. President Obama meets with leading thinkers from the left and the right to reflect on poverty and income inequality. Jason Calvi reports from the White House tonight. Jason?
Brian, it was a rare event. The president taking part in a panel at a summit featuring Catholics and evangelicals on the topic of overcoming poverty. Now, the discussion was civil at Georgetown University, but the differences were clear. President Obama says recent riots in places like Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore show the country needs to find new ways to fight poverty.
Part of what's happened is
he says stereotypes get in the way. According to the president, government investment is key. He also says family plays an important role, too.
I am a black man who grew up without a father, and I know the cost that I paid for that. And I also know that I have the capacity to break that cycle. And as a consequence, I think my daughters are better off.
This conference is so important.
When it came to discussing policy specifics, divisions were clear. Arthur Brooks, the head of the conservative American Enterprise Institute, offered a different approach to the president. Brooks cited scripture, saying the poor are our brothers. He says a social safety net is important, but free enterprise is what really makes a difference for the poor.
The reason I came into the free enterprise movement many years ago is because poverty is the thing I care about the most. And in point of fact, 2 billion people around the world have been lifted up out of poverty because of ideas revolving around free enterprise.
Robert Putnam, a professor of public policy at Harvard, also joined the discussion. The president says Pope Francis has transformed the fight on poverty. Now, with Obama, we have to mention that he has been at odds with the U.S. bishops on the issue, especially the HHS mandate, which forces most employers to cover abortion-inducing drugs and birth control. Brian?
Jason Calvi at the White House, thank you. Kim Daniels with Catholic Voices USA was part of the Poverty Summit at Georgetown, and we hear very different approaches to overcoming poverty from the president, from Arthur Brooks. Is there any common ground from where they can work from?
In fact, I think what was so interesting was how much common ground there was.
Really?
This is an interesting time because it's a time when we have people from both the left and the right coming together to talk about what a serious moral issue poverty is. So you have new voices on the right who are recognizing that there are economic pressures on the family that really are fundamental to address poverty. And at the same time, you have voices on the left who are recognizing that family structure is key. President Obama talked about the connectivity of our social institutions, and Arthur Brooks talked about being open-handed to our brothers. This idea of trying to increase social mobility for our kids, for the poor, is something that we can all come to agreement on.
So do you think the president sees this as a moral issue?
I do. I think he does see it as a moral issue, and at the same time, I think that he recognizes that there are many different ways we need to approach it. I think it's very true that people on the right see it as a moral issue as well, and are looking for ways to address it in an effective and new way.
But there are problems here in the sense that, okay, here he is. He comes to the oldest Catholic university in the U.S., Georgetown. He praises the Pope, yet he is so opposed with the Holy Father on some key moral issues such as life. How do you work on an issue like this with a person like this?
There's no doubt that there are deep disagreements between the Catholic Church and President Obama on fundamental issues like care for the unborn and care for their mothers, like marriage, like religious liberty. And those issues should not go unaddressed. And at the same time, when we do have areas of common ground, I think it's important to come together and have these conversations. Poverty is such a fundamental challenge for our country. And as Pope Francis reminds us again and again, the poor are at the heart of our faith. They're at the heart of the gospel. And if we want to address that, we need to come together to find policy solutions. Another interesting thing this weekend, or excuse me, these last few days, was just talking about the kinds of policy solutions that we can agree on. EITC expansion, criminal justice reform, lots of ideas are out there, and hopefully we can move those forward.
Doesn't the Catholic Church have a pretty good track record in approaching poverty? Hasn't it seen more success than, say, big government?
Well, it's definitely true that the Catholic Church has a focus on the poor. And again, Pope Francis has been bringing that focus to the front of the conversation. And one of the many parts of our Catholic social teaching that we bring to the conversation is this preferential option for the poor. We also have something you might call the preferential option for the family. We understand that the family is at the center of human flourishing, and that a man and a woman together with their children is one of the greatest gifts you can give to a child to bring them out of poverty. As Brad Wilcox said this morning, an intact family is almost a luxury good these days, and one part of the conversation needs to be, how do we make family and economic pressures part of the conversation together? Because certainly families suffer from those economic pressures as well.
You express that so beautifully. No surprise your association with Catholic Voices USA. Kim Daniels, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Rebellious Senate Democrats deal President Obama a stinging blow today, blocking open debate on his trade initiatives. Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell calls today's developments pretty shocking. Most Republican lawmakers support free trade agreements. Today's vote, though, highlighted a deep divide between Obama and congressional Democrats who say trade deals hurt U.S. jobs. Labor unions and liberal groups, crucial to many Democrats' elections, are leading the fight against trade deals. The president's supporters say they will try again, possibly starting in the House. Fear is reignited in Nepal today as a second massive earthquake hits the already ravaged land. Landslides and toppled buildings have killed dozens, injuring more than 1,000 people. Even more powerful quake hit less than 3 weeks ago, killing more than 8,000 people. Today's magnitude 7.3 earthquake was centered in remote mountain areas northeast of the capital, Kathmandu. Joining us by Skype from Kathmandu, Nepal, Robin Contina with Catholic Relief Services. The internet is out there, Robin, so we have a kind of a vague picture of you, but we see you and hear you. You just had another earthquake strike. Tell us exactly what you're going through right now after this quake hit today.
You know, the earthquake hit, and it was quite a surprise as Kathmandu was coming back to life in the past couple of days. We feel tremors every day, and when this one hit, it was long, and it was pretty rough, and everyone ran into the street and was screaming. People were crying, and I think people are just hoping that it doesn't rain tonight and that they're able to sleep. People have set up tents outside. People are going to any open space they possibly can so that they can sleep and they can be safe while it's dark.
What is Catholic Relief Services able to do for these people, and how is the aid that you're receiving from us here in America helping with that?
We are getting the aid, and we absolutely appreciate the outpouring of support from the Catholic community. The funds that people are sharing go to provide shelter kits, hygiene kits, and much needed relief to the people who are affected all over the country.
Robin Contino with Catholic Relief Services. We know that this is a very difficult time for you and the folks there. We thank you for being able to join us by Skype. Our prayers are with you, and we'll continue to send help as well.
Thank you so much. We appreciate all of your thoughts and prayers.
And cleanup continues today in eastern Texas, where storm survivors are now counting their blessings.
Once you find out everybody's okay, then you thank God for your blessings, and everything else is just possessions. We can rebuild.
A tornado struck the small town of Van, Texas, killing 2 people Monday. 9 people are still hospitalized tonight. Classes were canceled again today at schools that have been damaged. Flooding near Dallas has also killed at least 1 person. A Catholic activist movement sharply criticized by the Vatican shows signs of reconciliation. In a first, Liberation Theology founder Father Gustavo Gutierrez appears at a Vatican news conference.
We have no charity without justice.
The Vatican has previously disciplined vocal supporters of liberation theology, citing Marxist undercurrents of that movement. Some versions of liberation theology conflict with church teaching because they view Christ as merely a social liberator. Pope Francis warns the rich and powerful they will be judged by God on whether they fed the poor and cared for the earth. That warning came during Mass today for the Vatican's Caritas Internationalis Charity Federation. It was the Pope's latest exhortation ahead of the release of his encyclical on the environment. That's expected to be issued next month. He warned that we must preserve the environment so it can produce the food needed to make sure everyone has something to eat. Well, it's official now. Barack Obama's presidential library will be built on the south side of Chicago, where his political career began. The site, proposed by the University of Chicago, was selected over 3 others. Both the president and the first lady once worked at the University of Chicago. They still own a home near the campus. Coming up, an expert on the Blessed Mother explains the possible origins of May as Mary's month. And wealthy investors drive up the price of artwork, setting new auction records. On Tuesday, May 12th, thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. A new survey shows Americans are becoming more secular and less Christian. The results of the Pew Research Center study are released today, and Americans describing themselves as atheist, agnostic, or no particular faith grew from 16% in 2007 to nearly 23% last year. During that same time period, the number of self-proclaimed Christians fell from about 78% to just under 71% of the population. Now, the decline of Christians corresponds with the rise in the share of Americans with no religious affiliation. Dr. Chad Pecknold is professor of theology at Catholic University of America, and while these findings may seem troubling, they certainly don't take me by surprise. What do you think accounts for these shifts?
Well, there's certainly a lot of cultural pressures from moving from 78% to 70%. We're talking about still a sizable number of Americans, but I think what largely accounts for it is external pressures in our culture in which it's no longer a social advantage to be a Christian. And so what we see in this poll, I think, is not a decline of actual Christians, but a decline of nominal Christians who see no social advantage to checking yes to the Christian box when the pollsters come around.
So these figures may not exactly reflect the actual picture.
I think they're misleading. I think they fit a certain kind of secular narrative that we're always going to be getting less Christian and more secular. And I think we should be aware of that confirmation bias in how we interpret the data.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention. This study says the largest declines were among Catholics and the mainline Protestant denominations. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think the mainline Protestant denominations have been in a long-term decline, and I think it's largely because they have liberalized and increasingly liberalized, gotten far away from traditional Christian teaching, and that equates with loss. Now, on the Catholic side, the losses are more interesting, and when you drill down, we moved from 51 million Catholics in America in 2007 to somewhere between 48 and 50 million. So we're a loss of somewhere between 1 million and 3 million. What accounts for that? I think a lot of nominal Catholics who had made the same trajectory.
Are there others who may say they're Catholic or Christian who aren't really active in their church at all?
Well, I think the pressure in the culture will be for them to leave because, as I say, there's no social advantages to being Christian. Now, that shows up a very important aspect of our culture in which we see attacks on religious liberty and attacks on marriage as indicative of an increasing pressure on Christians to either take their faith seriously or to get out.
Well, I look at these figures and think, my grandchildren could grow up in a very different country than I did. Is there any way to address this and reverse this trend, do you think?
Absolutely. I think, for one thing, with Catholics, the idea of any social renewal is from personal conversion. And so lay Catholics, I think, have to take up the mantle, the vocation, the call to the new evangelization, both in terms of forming our families in the faith, but also in terms of a greater evangelistic witness.
Well, it's certainly a call to action for all of us. Dr. Chad Pecknold, theology professor at CUA. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Appreciate it. Well, an abortion study at the universities of Washington and Hawaii is meeting some strong opposition. That study recruits girls as young as 14 in their second trimester of pregnancy for abortions. Researchers are testing to see if oxytocin, a hormone that increases contractions during labor, can help control bleeding from abortion. Pro-life leaders and University of Hawaii students demand an investigation. Jason Jones, activist and filmmaker, joining us from Kapolei, Hawaii, where he is an alumnus of the University of Hawaii. Jason, you were involved in a rally there on campus against a study that's being done there on abortion. What was the reaction to you guys who rallied?
Aloha, Brian. Well, the response was overwhelming. I can tell you that the Native Hawaiian community is of one voice that they don't want this study in our state, as is most of the rest of our community. We're asking ourselves, there are over 4,000 universities in the United States, over 500 hospitals. Why did money from the mainland come to our community to do research on our young women, a study that in the study they admit that it's dangerous. In the study they admit that they don't know how to stop this bleeding.
Has the university been any more open about where the funding's coming from?
No, they haven't been open at all, and that's what's really frustrating, because we don't know where this money is coming from. There's one thing you can say about the state of Hawaii. May 10th is the feast of St. Damien, and if there's one thing the state of Hawaii is known for, it's loving and caring for the vulnerable, loving and caring for women and children.
It's shocking. Do you think attitudes have changed there since you were there as a student and a pro-life activist?
You know, I've been here for 25 years, and I arrived as a young atheist kid who was passionately pro-life, but other than that was sort of empty of values. And so I feel like the community here poured values into me. It's a very pro-life community. It always has been. But what we're learning how to do is how to leverage that sentiment for political success, to make sure that children here do have legal protection from the violence of abortion. The Hawaiians have a word called hanai. And what that word means is it's an informal adoption of a child of any age. And it tells us that in Hawaii, there's no unwanted child. There's no woman that will go through a crisis pregnancy alone. And so it's a very pro-life culture. I tell people, Hawaii is the most pro-life state in the union. The problem is we haven't really been able to leverage that success or that sentiment politically, and that's what we're learning to finally do.
Well, we're really grateful that you've been able to connect with us from Hawaii, and looking forward to seeing Little Boy. Of course, we really appreciated Bella, film producer and pro-life activist Jason Jones. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brian. If everyone can ask St. Damien to intercede for the people of Hawaii to get this study out of our state.
Up next, his family is famous and he chairs Special Olympics. Wyatt Goolsby visits with author Tim Shriver. And Pope Francis encourages kids to be peacemakers. It is a blessing to have you with us tonight for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. A member of the famous Kennedy family is honored. Special Olympics chairman Timothy Shriver recently received a Christopher Award for his memoir. Wyatt Goolsby talked with him about his work as an advocate for people with intellectual disabilities.
It was only fitting the day after Mother's Day we talked with Tim Shriver inside his mother's office. The late Eunice Kennedy Shriver, JFK's sister, founded the Special Olympics back in the 1960s. Her son has followed in her footsteps the last 2 decades as chairman.
For decades, you've advocated for people with intellectual disabilities. What have they taught you?
What people with Down syndrome or autism or Williams syndrome or other kinds of developmental disabilities always ask me in a way is, why have you cut me out? What is it about me that scares you? And can't you see the human spirit in me too?
The full title of your book is Fully Alive, Discovering What Matters Most. In a nutshell, what does matter most in life?
I just want people to believe that God is in everything. I mean, it's not a small belief, it's a big belief. It's a belief that I think is at the heart of the gospel.
Let's talk about your Catholic upbringing. How has that impacted the way you view the world? How has it impacted your life?
I have found of what is greatest in Catholicism is that it's a completely don't check the box, have the experience. Have the experience. Come back until you can quiet yourself in the rosary. Come back until you can feel united with God in the Eucharist. Come back until you can feel free of the burdens of sin in the sacrament of reconciliation.
I think a lot of people would agree that the Special Olympics affirms the value of human life and the dignity of every human person. How do you begin to counter a culture that disregards in many ways people with intellectual disabilities?
We are a revolution of dignity. We are resolute in advocating for a single standard for dignity, and that is that everybody deserves it, no exceptions. And now we bring that same person out, and he's 12 years old, and he kicks the ball, and he scores a goal. And he's no longer a label, and he's no longer a diagnosis, and he's no longer a syndrome. He's a champion.
All right, Tim Shriver, we really appreciate your time and your willingness to talk with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tim and Wyatt. Well, tomorrow's feast of Our Lady of Fatima falls right in the middle of the month of May, traditionally celebrated as Mary's Month. Father Paul Hafner is a native of England who now teaches in Rome, the author of Mystery of Mary. Certainly you've studied Mary extensively, Father. Why do we celebrate Mary during the month of May?
Well, there are two special months set aside for Mary, May and October. October's more particularly for the Rosary. May is a special time which falls during Eastertide, so perhaps we celebrate most particularly Mary's participation in her Son's redemptive act and the fruits of it, namely his resurrection, ascension, and the sending of the Holy Spirit.
There's certainly a special devotion to our Blessed Mother there in Rome. You see little shrines all around the streets there. Tell us what you experienced there with this Marian devotion.
I think Mary's been a great protector of the city down through many, many centuries. She's protected individuals, communities, the city as a whole. In a positive way, she's guided the people of Rome to a deeper faith. She's been a very close associate of many popes in their work of governing and guiding the universal church. We saw this most particularly in John Paul II recently, Pope Benedict XVI, and now Pope Francis.
What can we do as Catholics to grow closer to our Blessed Mother, to really see her as our intercessor with her Son Jesus?
Pray every day the Rosary. Pray the Rosary with great devotion and with great thought, linking it up with the Scriptures, linking up the Rosary with Christ, her Son. If possible, when you go to Mass each day, make in your thanksgiving after Mass a special little altar on your heart to Mary. And also, when you get up in the morning, when you go to bed, try and dedicate those special moments. Dedicate your heart to Mary, Mother of God.
Beautiful suggestions. The author of Mystery of Mary, Father Paul Hafner, joining us from Rome. Thank you, Father.
Thank you. Thank you.
And of course, we get to place Mary in a very special spot tomorrow on the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima. A vibrant painting by Pablo Picasso is auctioned at a world record price.
Sold to you, Mark, at 126 million.
Picasso's Women of Algiers sold for $179 million yesterday. And Alberto Giacometti's sculpture also set a record at $141 million. Both new owners are remaining anonymous. Experts say the record prices are driven by the art's investment value. They say wealthy collectors are seeking out the very best works. And Pope Francis hangs out with thousands of kids, some even getting a chance to question the Holy Father.
Caro Papa Francesco, noi siamo bambini fortunati, nati in Italia.
The focus of Monday's gathering of children was peace, how to build it and how to keep it. This was sponsored by the Peace Factory, a non-government organization promoting understanding through education. The Vatican says about 7,000 kids participated in that conference, and their parents too. Until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. Watch again anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. For our great EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and may God bless you.